Everyone, it's Dr. Ramani. Let's talk about consequences, right? Consequences are what happen after a behavior and shape whether that behavior happens again. So, what kinds of consequences matter to a narcissistic person? The universal piece is that consequences shape behavior, but the other piece is what consequences matter. So, we know, blah, 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 narcissistic people won't change, but we often need to make these relationships work. And the only way that can happen is if we can shape their behavior somewhat, right? The way we shape anyone's behavior is the consequences we set for someone's behavior. Behavior is shaped by consequences, right? Pay me extra for the extra work, I'm going to want to keep doing the extra work. Give a person frequent flyer miles and perks, they may keep flying your airline. Give a kid a gold star, he may keep making his bed, right? It's not quite that simple, but it's also kind of that simple, right? I mean, listen, with animals, this is much easier. Food is almost always rewarding for every animal, right? You give your pup a treat after they do whatever thing you want them to do, and we assume that they keep getting the treat when they keep doing the thing you want. We can shape their behavior so they'll keep learning to do the thing we want them to do. It'll become a habit. Every so often we'll reward them, and that'll be enough. For people, this can be a lot more complicated. Because with people, unlike animals where food is almost always rewarding, we have to figure out what is rewarding for someone, right? If you give that person who does that extra work just $5, that may not be enough to interest them in doing that again. But a much more meaningful amount of money, or perhaps something that might be even more meaningful to them, like maybe a day off or a better parking spot, that may then result in the desired behavior to repeat. We got to figure out for each person what matters. Now that's rewards, right? That stuff's called positive reinforcement. But what about other kinds of consequences? Punishment, for example, is a consequence, right? We give someone something aversive. We do something to someone that's aversive with the goal that they stop the behavior. A speeding ticket, being grounded for coming home late, docking a person's pay for not showing up. You want them to stop the thing they're doing, so you penalize them, right? Now, punishment, we know, doesn't work as well as those rewards, as that positive reinforcement to shape behavior. But if a consequence is aversive enough, losing a driver's license, missing out on a fun event, losing a job, then just the possibility of the consequence may be enough to keep a person in line, and you don't even have to deliver the consequence because they don't want it to happen. But the consequence of the behavior has to be meaningful to a person if it's going to change or shape their behavior. And this is where it gets tricky with narcissistic folks. Many of you may think, listen, I can't get out of this relationship, or I have to have ongoing contact with this person, so I have to figure out some kind of consequence so their behavior isn't so awful. Or you may want to figure out a reward that will get them to repeat a behavior that you want them to do. Let's break down this whole consequence problem a little bit. So first, when you're thinking about this in terms of narcissistic people, let's start with what is meaningful to narcissistic people as a reward. For most narcissistic folks, validation and admiration and other clear sources of narcissistic supply are incredibly motivating. So that will include effusive praise, attention, applause, being told they're great, overblown gratitude. It may also be proximity to important people or VIPs or people whom they perceive to be VIPs, or being at the right concert, the right event, the right party, whatever the hip or cultural cred that gives them status is. Other things may include high status items, cars, clothing, jewelry, watches, boats. Now, since you are not going to give a narcissistic person a boat for emptying the trash, do keep in mind that other rewards, such as giving them lots of praise, but then you have to be careful because all that praise can't seem fake, because for all of the narcissistic person's lack of empathy and disconnection, they actually have a really well-honed sense of when they are being spoken to like they're an 8-year-old child, like, oh, you took out the trash, oh my God, my sweetie. Needs to be something a little more subtle, like, hey, thanks so much for getting the trash out. So helpful to me. I know how busy you've been, so thank you so much for doing that. I appreciate it. That means I can go take care of this. Now, you're going to want to throw up after saying that to them, especially since they may only take out the trash 1 out of every 10 times, but it may up the odds that they might do it 2 out of every 10 times. Remember, it's all about supply, and supply is the only thing that matters to them. So if you want them to do something again or keep doing something, figure out what kind of supply is meaningful to them. It's not all created the same, and give that to them if you can. It may also be part of a fluffing strategy that you need to do to get something done. Figure out what kind of supply they like most, offer it up, get them to do the thing you need, and be done with it. Does that feel manipulative? Sure. But it's kids' play compared to the kind of manipulation you're enduring in this relationship. And remember, your supply doesn't always work as well as someone else's, so you can only get so far with that. Now, what about what I call the dark rewards, right? Narcissistic supply isn't just praise and prizes and validation and stuff and status. Narcissistic supply can also be the narcissist getting a rise or a strong emotional reaction out of someone else. When they do that, it's its own form of supply because it allows the narcissistic person to feel dominant, in control, and to maintain their identity as the strong one, and subsequently label you as weak because you're so emotional. It can also be supply for them to witness someone fail or lose, or watch someone experience anything that allows them to think of themselves as great and the other person as less. If the narcissistic person is mad at someone or believes that they have been wronged by someone, it may also be either seeing the narcissistic person's own attempt at getting revenge succeed, or watching that the person that they perceive as doing them wrong going down. If the narcissistic person thinks their revenge is working or their baiting is working, they're going to keep doing it. That's tricky. What do you do with consequences there? So you might be thinking, but what about when they do things that I do not like? What about those behaviors I just want them to stop? What then? Now that gets a lot more complicated. If we know what constitutes the strongest narcissistic supply for them, well, we can build on that to figure out what will make them uncomfortable, and that would be losing supply. Less attention, admiration, and validation, taking those things away. So when they're yammering on one more time about something in their life that's they don't like or that they don't agree with or someone's doing them wrong, don't engage with them. This is why techniques like gray rock exist. It's basically a way of taking away narcissistic supply. Another sort of way of giving a consequence is by not noticing something in them. They're wearing some fancy new thing or engaging in some kind of grandiose prattle about something they did, and you may just nod and say, yeah, cool, that sounds like fun. And they want you to ooh and ah, ooh, you had a front row ticket. Nobody could get those tickets. You not doing that turns you into less interesting supply. If you're fortunate, they may take their ridiculous conversations elsewhere. So this is, again, where it gets a lot more difficult. Let's think about a difficult conversation. For example, they're gaslighting you or baiting you. You know intellectually that if you get into the mud with them, it is going to escalate and just keep getting worse. At those times, because you don't want that to keep happening, the best consequence is to disengage. Even when they escalate and say worse and worse things, remember what the reward for them is. You losing it, you getting angry, you showing emotion. If you do that, you are in essence giving them that, honestly, positive reward, and they're going to do it again. You may think, that's ridiculous. How could my losing it be a reward? Because it goes back to what I just said. It lets them feel like they're the ones who are well put together and dominant. So do not give it to them. So what are other consequences for the narcissistic person that are meaningful? One is when they do what we call losing face, when they look bad socially. This isn't really about shaping their behavior, but But just knowing that when they aren't the good one, the center of attention, the winner, then for a lot of narcissistic folks, that can really unsettle them. Now, that's a very tough consequence for you to issue because it can just as easily backfire on you if you're trying to paint them in a bad light to others. The best thing you can do is just let them be them. Because at some point, they will lose face. It's inevitable with them that they'll behave badly. Sometimes us engaging with them doesn't let that natural process unfold. Let them be the ones who do it. Now, another loss for them is a loss of success or attainment, or looking back, or like their work not going the way they want. And then again, there often isn't much you can do to make that happen in most cases as a consequence. But when it does, it's definitely a meaningful consequence for them. For example, let's say they mismanage money at work or behave inappropriately at work and they get called out on it. They will typically go down the witch hunt rabbit hole or blame other people. But if there are real losses for them, loss of a professional title, a license, a reputation, a public image, that is a very meaningful consequence for them. Again, it just may be a consequence you may not be able to generate. What's another big consequence for narcissistic folks? When they lose superficial stuff, like literal stuff, money, fancy house, that's a big loss. But also another consequence, and the interesting thing about this consequence is that it will happen, this consequence I'm about to talk about, will happen to every narcissistic person in the world if they live long enough, which is getting old. I actually think that narcissistic people don't really ever believe they will get older or that they'll ever die. And getting old means bodies that don't work as well, wrinkles, breasts that don't stay up, erections that don't show up, hair that falls out, and at some point the fillers, surgeons, and all the rest of it can't make it go away. And despite the narcissistic tech bro prattling about things you can eat and do to live to be 180 years old, at this point in time, the loss of power that aging brings is the ultimate consequence that all narcissistic people will ultimately face. And I know you're thinking, Dr. Ramani, that is not gratifying to hear. I can't fast forward on the clock. No, it's not. Because you may not want to wait that long. But that consequence is always out there dangling. And there ain't no Botox in the world that's going to take it away. Now, since most of you are not going to wait 60 years for the narcissistic person in your life to get really old and not look the way they want or be who they want, the most meaningful consequence, the consequence that all of these sub-consequences have in common, is when the narcissistic person loses supply. And while you may not and should not be able to topple their business or destroy their public reputation or make them fail financially, you have the power to do one thing, and that's pull back on your supply. Ultimately, the winner in that will be you, if you can withstand the baiting. Because if you're really lucky, they'll simply move to a new source of supply. And the real win is if you do not have to deal with their behavior on an ongoing basis. Because that right there, talking about consequences, that is a reward for you. So it's tough. What's meaningful to narcissistic people? What kinds of consequences matter to them? Yeah, some of them might be the same as you. Might say, look, I like admiration. You don't live for it. And for many of us, certainly none of us want to lose the things narcissistic people and us would have that. Everyone has that in common. That idea of supply and that other people are supply and that your power in their life is that you are bringing supply. Stop doing it and see what happens. Thanks again.